first thing we need to think about when playing Texas Hold'em are what hands we should play and what hands to throw away. In the next few sections, I'm going to get into specific detail about what hands you should play in what positions. Throughout the poker school, you're going to hear me throw around the term position quite a bit. Now, there are 3 positions at the table: early, middle, and late. The first 3 seats are generally considered early position. Then we have middle position, and the button and the 2 seats directly to the right of the button would be considered late position. Well, the first group of hands that we're going to look at are big pairs and ace-king suited. Now, obviously, you're going to play one of these hands in any one of the positions. But in early position, it's really important to make sure that you're raising to try to limit the field a little bit. You don't want to play 2 kings against 4 players. Now, moving on to middle position, if you've already had some action in front of you, again, it's important to raise, but you should be raising a little more to protect your hand. Now, in late position, this is the best possible spot you could be in. You've already seen all the action in front of you. You're going to get to act last on every single street, which is a huge benefit in Texas Hold'em. Now, again, with one of these hands, you should raise. So in all 3 situations, you should basically be raising with these hands. Since they're so good, you want to put more money in the pot. Now, with hands like King-Jack offsuit or Queen-10 offsuit, those are both decent hands. The problem with those hands come into play when you flop top pair with a weak kicker. Let's say, for example, you had King-Jack, which is what I like to call the rookie hand, and the flop comes King-4-5. Well, if you catch that king on the flop, you're going to be sucked into the river. And if somebody has a better kicker than you, ace-king or king-queen, you're just going to be losing a lot of money with that hand. Probably the trickiest hands to play are those pesky middle pairs. I'm talking about jacks, 10s, 9s, and even 8s, really. Now, from early position, there's a couple ways you can approach it. Limping is sort of a cautious way to see what happens behind you, but generally, it goes along with my style. It would be to raise with these hands and try to sort of isolate and maybe play it against one opponent. Now, for middle position, it would depend on what happened ahead of you. If nobody's raised yet, well, again, you'd play just like you would in early position, and you'd raise. However, if somebody's already raised in front of you, and you're looking down at 2 8s, I don't know, if the guy's raising from early position, chances are he's got a real good hand. With 8s, I think I would just call there and see a flop. If you catch an 8, now we've got a real hand. From late position, if nobody's entered the pot yet, this is a perfect kind of hand you want to attack the blinds with by making a raise. However, again, if there's a raise in front of you, I just call. Now, if you're facing a raise and a re-raise, well, how can 2 8s or 2 9s be good? That's a time to save some money, throw it away, and don't find yourself in a bad spot with 8s up against a bigger pair like queens or kings. You need to be really careful when you're playing small pairs. In early position, I advise just limping in and trying to see the flop cheaply. Now, you could fold, and that's probably what the books would tell you to do. The other option would be to raise. And now I'd only recommend raising if you feel like you've got command of the table and that the blinds are really on the conservative side. Now for middle position, if nobody's entered the pot yet, lean towards raising and trying to attack the blinds. However, if there's already been some limpers, well then you can limp along as well and try to see a cheap flop. Now, if there's been a raise already, if it's a small raise, maybe you can see a flop and try to flop a set. Now from late position, this is ideal. If nobody's entered the pot, definitely you want to raise it up and attack the blinds. However, again, if there's been a small raise or some limpers, you can see a flop. There's nothing sweeter than calling with 2 4s against an early position raise who's got 2 aces and the flop coming queen 6-4. He bets it, you move all in, and he walks home with a story to tell. Suited connectors. Now we're getting into the fun stuff. If you play these hands correctly, you can win yourself a lot of money. From early position, with a short stack, you just got to throw it away. If you had a big stack, though, you might be able to throw in a small raise for deceptive purposes. Now in middle position, if you're facing a raise, depends how big the raise is in relation to your stack size. If the raise is too big, well, you just can't play. However, if nobody's played, you can come in with a raise and go after the blinds. In late position, now this is where it gets fun. If there's a couple limpers, you go ahead and limp right along. If everyone's folded around to you, again, you go and raise to attack the blinds. But here, if an early position player raises and you think they might have aces or kings, this is perfect if you have a hand like 5, 7 of diamonds. He has aces, so what? If you hit your flop, you've got him right where you want him. Think about it. Say you flop it straight. He bets, you raise, he sticks it all in. You're like, sweet, I got the nuts straight. He's got a story to tell his buddies about how bad you play. So the bottom line with suited connectors is it's really all about implied odds. Think of it like fishing. You're throwing out the bait, and then really what you're trying to do is reel in a big sucker if you hit a good flop. Okay, well certainly the mathematics behind Hold'em are extremely important. You know, understanding pot odds, starting position, and all the other aspects of the game. But realistically, what it all boils down to is the way you read your opponents. What we're going to look at now are some of the various opponents you're going to face in the game. Playing against amateurs is where you're going to make the brunt of your money. I mean, these guys don't know what they're doing. They're playing all sorts of hands they shouldn't be playing, calling all kinds of bets they definitely shouldn't be calling. So the thing to think about when playing these amateurs is, because they're calling stations, you don't want to bluff them. If you start bluffing amateurs, then you become an amateur, really. Now the rocks just play super tight. When you're up against the rock, they're always in there with a premium hand. And whenever they bet at you, they pretty much always got the nuts. So how do you defend against that? It's pretty easy, really. If a rock ever bets at you, just throw your hand away. You want to avoid marginal situations. Also, when it's a rock that's in the blind, you should go ahead and raise it up. The guy's never going to play unless he has the absolute nuts. Rocks do really well against amateurs, and they do well against maniacs. But as a pro, you can exploit a rock really easily. Now, when you're up against a maniac, you really have to have your seatbelt on. I mean, these guys are nuts. They're always betting, raising, re-raising, bluffing, with all kinds of weird hands. So the way to defend against that is you really got to set traps for them. Let them bluff their money off and milk them all the way to the river. Set traps, that's the key. The problem is, for a pro, maniacs can often be a thorn in your side. The maniacs do really poorly against the rocks, and they do poorly against the amateurs, but they can often take a pro down. When you're up against a pro, you better bring your A game. Pros aren't easily predictable. They mix up their game really well. Sometimes they're bluffing, sometimes they're playing the nuts. They're always constantly changing gears at will. So why bother pick on a pro when you have other opportunities to beat up on the weak players? Stick to beating up on the amateurs and the rocks. The only time you should face off against a pro is when you've got a really strong hand yourself.